This is update for August 2, 2023, day 525 of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for August 1, July 30, 31, 30th, basically all of the short break that I had. So apologies for this sort of break, but sometimes I need a break. So I'm gonna go over, as always, gonna go over strategic developments, and then I'm gonna switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine, where really there's not much going on, but I just want to provide an update. But let's first start with the, I would say, most important news that happened on August 1st, which is downgrade of the U.S. as a country, as a sovereign by Fitch. This is one of the three major rating agencies, credit rating agencies. So basically, what this means, it affects your ability to borrow, right? So it's like you have a credit card and you have the credit score. So this three companies, they establish your credit score, and so basically they downgraded your credit score, so your ability to borrow is essentially is going down. It's still, it doesn't mean that don't want this to be understood literally, that U.S. cannot borrow and so on. So U.S. was top, the best credit rating you can have, right? So it had it's AAA. So so you can imagine it's not like you becoming worthless borrower or anything. This is just a very worrying trend, and I'll explain in more detail what's in as I go through this. Then you probably will understand. But at a high level, I just want to explain. So there is three companies. Two of them, so S&P downgraded US a long time ago in 2011. Now Fitch joined, and there is only Moody outstanding. So it's still very high. It's still, as you can see here, high grade. So the sort of worthless borrowers are this. Well, they're not really worthless, but it's just interest rate is going through the roof once you get into this so-called non-investment grade or junk group. As you can see, US is far away from that. So, but the trend is really in the wrong direction. That's where there is a concern, and this is what affected immediately pretty much interest rate, and specifically 10-year US borrowing on the 10-year notes that US government issues. It's called 10-year treasuries. It went immediately up. And let me explain what's happening and why it's a very, let's say, problematic situation, and the trend is very problematic, let's put it this way. So let me start at a high level. This is US budget here. You can see receipts, it's basically revenues, outlays is basically expenses, just a simple language. So as you can see, the revenue was really high, in the highest in 2022, almost 4.9 trillion. But expenses were also, a little bit lower than in 2021, but still high. So the net amount is a deficit, right? It's like you exceed your revenue, your expenses exceed your revenue, so you need to borrow this money, right? Roughly 1.4 trillion US needed to borrow in 2022. US government. I'm not talking about the private individuals and all of that. That's on top of it. That's a separate question. This is just a question about the U.S. government, right? So during the COVID pandemic, as you can see, things were even worse: 3.1, 2.8 trillion. So this was really bad. Pre-pandemic, as you can see, the borrowing amount was, I would say, fairly modest relative to what we're seeing right now. And then an important metric here is what percentage of GDP this borrowing is. And as you can see, during pandemic, it really reached high, like 15, 12% of GDP. And that really, the importance of this is that this number is showing you how much of unbacked credit being issued into the economy. it's effectively additional tax on everyone. That's what's really happening. So you can think this way, that revenue is taxes collected directly, and then difference between expenses uh, and the revenues and expenses, it's additional. If the revenues are much higher than expenses, this is additional indirect tax that being put on the society as a whole, on the economy as a whole. And this is sort of shows you the level of that taxation, basically additional taxes that are being put on the citizen. And in case of US, majority of this revenue is actually coming from individuals. Corporations in the US, like they pay like, out of, let's say, this 4.9 trillion, they pay at best like 400 billion. So majority of it is really coming from every single person, every single citizen who works and earns any kind of money in the US. So this is, I think, to extent, I guess, unusual system, because in many countries, corporations are the main source of government revenue, but it's not the case in the US. So this is how it used to be, right? So situation seems to be sort of getting better in 2022, or at least the trend was going into sort of right direction. So what happened in this is, and now we're going to look at this table. This is 2023 year to date, basically. The budget year in the US, it starts on October 1st. So 2023 budget year started on October 1st, 2022. So this is October through June. So basically, it's 9 months of the budget. So we have 3 months left to go for 2023. So the big problems that showing up in the U.S. budget, and this is also actually tells a lot about the economy, is that revenues, as you can see, started to go down. It's down 420 billion relative to 2022, and this is 2022. We saw that, right? At the same time, expenses went up almost 500 billion relative, again, to 2022. So the whole net result so far is almost 900 billion, right? So this is basically both parts of equation are going in a negative direction, creating cumulative negative effect of close to $1 trillion. So what we're seeing here in 2022, in 2023, it's going to be much worse. So I would say, if let's say estimate for revenue will be 4.4 trillion, expenses are going to be 6.8 trillion. So US is going to have a negative 2.4 trillion of the budget deficit. So again, this is going to be something that's going to be a stealth tax. It's a first thing, and that actually produces inflation. And this is, again, going back to this inflation situation and the whole, overall financial health and economic health in the US, and similar things are happening in the world. I'm just speaking on the US today because of this downgrade that happened, and explaining so why this is, in a way, I'm trying to explain why this is happening in part, and it looks like it's gonna get worse unless there are actually changes in the U.S. budget and just basically fiscal discipline. Things are gonna actually can get much worse, and that's why market is sort of seeing this. All of the participants or investors in a bond market, specifically U.S. Treasury market, this is very, how to say, cold, calculated market. This is not emotional like equities market. People here just more sort of, how to say, rational, not non-emotional, and so they immediately understand where it's all going, and that's why interest rates went up, because Essentially, what this really means is, if you don't have your budget in order, you issue too much unbacked, credit because you're borrowing, right? That's what you're doing. So and government doesn't create anything, right? So all it is, when it borrows more money, all it really means it's creating unbacked credit. Or what it really means, it's going to extract more from the general sort of population. That's really what this all is about. And so that really means a much worse situation, worsening situation, and that's why treasury market wants higher compensation for that risk. And so again, going back to this whole situation, it's not sort of non-event. It's very bad development. It actually overall shows very uh, poor health. First of all, bad fiscal discipline, and also if you look at the situation with the revenues, which, as I said, is all driven by individuals in the U.S. Right? Everyone who pays taxes at the individual level, live person, that's who generates majority of this income, and it's down 420 billion so far for cumulative 9 months for fiscal 2023. That does not imply a good situation overall in the economy, in the health of economy, and obviously on the individual finances. So again, there's a lot of I'd say negative signs from all of this information. And just for the reference, so if US has to pay interest rate, US has a 32.5 trillion of interest so far at this point, plus minus couple days. And if interest rates go to actually where, if it were to pay at interest rate that's sort of prevalent interest rate, which is roughly, let's say, 4 to 5%. Let's take 4% on this 32.5 trillion. US would have to pay just for the interest per year 1.3 trillion. So think about this: if you earn 1.4 only for interest, you would have to pay 1.3 trillion, right? And if it really goes to, like, let's say 5, it's already 1.6. So the situation is so, again, out of 4.4, you're paying 1.6, right? And so it's very clear that situation in terms of indebtedness, governmental indebtedness in the US is becoming very dangerous. It doesn't mean things will collapse tomorrow. That's not the case. But let's say if things kind of continue on the same trajectory in the year, let's say next summer 2024, or like towards the fall of 2024, things will get really bad and really dangerous in the US. And it's going to be very combustible. Economic situation will, and this always, this bad economic situation always bleeds into bad political situation, and we're actually gonna look into that in case of Germany. Let's actually move now to that. So first of all, I want to a little bit discuss what's going on in China. There is another data point for China that came out: manufacturing PMI. As you can see, this is Caixin. It's kind of like a media group that basically does it. There's another one that's competing company. I don't know. Actually, don't know the name of it. But this one also showing that negative trend, first of all, from 50.5 to 49.2. And as I mentioned before, 50 is a threshold between contraction and growth. Above 50 is you growing, below 50 you're going down. So as you can see, this confirms Chinese economy is shrinking, Chinese manufacturing is shrinking. And the importance of manufacturing, because China manufacturing is the driver of the entire economy. This is where the wealth is generated. This is where the value add is generated. And this is the largest piece of the economy in China, unlike US, where it's actually they almost like a mirror opposite, right? So in US, manufacturing is small, uh, relatively unimportant. Most of it is services. In China, it's opposite. It's manufacturing is the most important. It's the largest. It's where the value generated, and services are much smaller. They do grow, but they and the Chinese government tried to sort of grow it, and this real estate bubble was sort of part of that growth of the sort of call it services or consumption. Basically, services is another word for consumption. Basically, they're trying to grow consumer by creating consumer debt in China, which is bad, and situation there is, I would say, out of control. But going back, the whole sort of linchpin of Chinese economy that still holds it, that makes China what it is right now, is manufacturing. It's obviously not consumption. Consumption is basically destruction and wasting of the wealth that you generated through manufacturing. And so this is what's going on in China. The importance is that the driver of the wealth is not feeling good in China, and that's the whole point of what I'm trying to make here. Now let's look at and the U.S. here at the bottom. Things, I don't know if it's getting a little bit better, but definitely U.S. manufacturing sort of starting to bottoming, and as you can see, previous numbers were in there again. This is actually two competing companies. I unfortunately made a mistake when I put this when I basically did not update the name. I think one is ISM. So this is S&P, the first one. So as you can see, it shows actually bump from 46 to 49. The 50 is the positive. So things seems to be kind of like not getting worse, at least based on S&P. And this is one company. And then I think this was actually ISM. I made a mistake here. So this one shows only small bump, but you can see that they both show positive trend. I'm not trying to say that like, okay, this is manufacturing renaissance and it's gonna skyrocket and everything, but at least the deterioration is let's put this way, is over, and it's sort of stabilized. That's the best way I can describe. And actually, when I looked in this ISM, which is kind of S&P, again, mistake here, but when I looked into it, the most concerning actually was that the employment component went down by actually 4 points. So it was, let's say, 48, it went down to 44. So that does not imply, expansion or imminent manufacturing renaissance. When manufacturers in US laying off people, this is definitely not a sign of things getting better. Also, Dallas Fed manufacturing basically index. So basically, this is all competing sources of the same information on manufacturing situation. This is obviously only in Dallas Fed area. So US is split into, and I don't remember how many of these Feds regions there. I think 6, 7, or 8, something like that. So Dallas is one of them, and this is actually where a lot of this semiconductor manufacturing is being built in the US, is in Texas, and specifically more Dallas area and Austin area. So you can see here, this is also showing bottoming out, and definitely no deterioration here at this point. It's still bad. This doesn't, as I said, doesn't mean turn around, everything's positive tomorrow, but things clearly stabilizing at the low point. I think that's probably the best way to describe the situation in the manufacturing in the US. Then there is another important data point that came out, this ADP employment. ADP is the largest pay processing company. Basically, this is outsourced provider, outsourced uh, salary payment company, or basically software. That's a lot of employers use in the US. I think I mentioned before, it's about 18% of the US market. I think something along those lines. So they process at least 18% of the salaries of payrolls in the US. So it shows that the US economy added jobs at 344,000 versus in the previous, in June it was 454. So it's definitely slowing down, and there is no question, and I would say there is no surprise that this is slowing down. That the job market in the U.S., and actually this is very in a way like almost phenomenon, that the job market remains very strong everywhere, despite all of this economic deterioration. The unemployment rate remains very low, and we're gonna see that a little bit actually in Germany. Not so much in Germany, I guess. So if you look at unemployment, and this is not seasonally adjusted, so this is not basically massaged by some statistician the way that statistician looks or thinks or whatever or feels like. This is just raw numbers. So you can see the number of unemployed people in Germany went up by from 2.5 million to 2.617. So this what 67,000 more unemployed people. It's still, unemployment remains very low even in Germany, where things are, I would say, still remain on. They still on a negative trajectory. The the speed of decline slowing down, that's for sure, but decline is still happening. So basically, it hasn't stabilized, like for example, like US at some low point. It's still sort of the stone is still flying down. It just the speed of descent is definitely declining. So you can see manufacturing PMI in Germany is still dropped still to 38.8. Which, as you can see, this number, so it's worst. You can compare it to China 49, US 46 or 49, whichever whichever provider you look. Here it's 38.8. So like one of the worst situations. And as I said before, this is all driven. It's self-inflicted damage in Germany by the due to the economic policies, and as I said many times before, fight on conventional energy. That's really what it produces. The more even astonishing that even retail sales, which is just nominal, they almost never go down. They went down. They continue going down 1.6% year on year. As you can see, prior reading was negative 2.1. So again, that's what I said. It's slowing down, but it's still the stone is still flying down. And this whole situation, as you can see, Germany is probably the worst situation out of their Europe, and let's say out of the sort of Atlantic region, because I would say that Asia Pacific is in terrible shape, and specifically, in my opinion, Korea, China is in horrible shape, comparable to Germany. But in, let's say, Atlantic region, Germany really stands out as one of the worst economically, and I explained why it's doing that. And so it's now overflowing very actively into political situation in Germany, where the alternative for it's a AfD, alternative for Deutschland. This party is very, very quickly gaining momentum. Like it's almost becoming number one in ratings in Germany. So this is the sort of blowback that goes from economy into political life. I don't know what's going to happen there. I'm not sort of to predict politics, but things are becoming combustible in Germany to the level that it bubbles up to the politics. And this is what, when I spoke about the US, the same things are happening in the US. It's just US much further behind. And if things continue the way they continue, probably, towards the end of 2024, things are going to get very combustible, in the US, from that sort of this sort of combustion is going to be coming from the economic situation. And that is big concern there. Let's quickly check some other countries. Actually, I want to mention Korea, South Korea, which is another big manufacturer, and it's actually more like value-added manufacturer, more advanced manufacturing relative to China. And then you see they posted again horrific uh, export numbers and import numbers, and export is the major driver of the Korean economy, and the same idea as Chinese economy. Manufacturing, high value added manufacturing, is a linchpin of the Korean economy. That's what creates wealth there. Basically, it's all about that. And as you can see, this exports clearly showing that that's, I would say, almost collapsing, right? So 16% versus 6% prior reading. Before that, I think it would be uh, April would be negative 15. So this is actually exceeding all of the previous, terrible reading that was happening before. So again, this is implying that the whole economy is doing really, really bad, and this is also implying that the global economy is doing pretty bad. And imports are even declining even worse, even more by quarter. This is, I would say, almost depression-like numbers. Um, and the only surprise actually is this still somehow positive growth of GDP. Uh, Actually haven't looked into details like components, because export and import are components of it. Maybe it was helped by huge decline in import that maybe propelled it. I don't know. Didn't have chance to look into this, but just this, more like building components tell much more than the whole sort of GDP. And as I said, looks like a depression-like numbers here um, in the South, in South Korea. But again, this is all tells about very poor health in Asia Pacific part of the world, in economies there. And that will actually also, this import negative import numbers really means that the commodity prices are unlikely to go through the roof. They probably will remain elevated, and that's part of the reason when you see that, for example, Ukraine is basically blocked from the grain market, and entire sort of Ukraine is the largest supplier, and it's essentially being wiped out from the global grain markets. Prices for grain don't go up and actually go down, is because I believe what we're thinking in the global near depression, slowly but surely, and so the demand, and by demand it really means people who have money and ability to pay, is shrinking. And so then even though you remove huge amount of supply, it's still, the prices don't go up, and that's very sort of logical. I would say probably makes a lot of sense for everyone. Then I want to look at Italy. There's some numbers for Italy. The inflation there is actually going down, and consistently going down. You see like 6%. Unemployment, that's what I mentioned before, is actually pretty strong even in Italy, which usually has pretty bad employment situation and also bad inflation. So actually, in some ways, Italy is actually surprisingly in the whole bad situation, that it's not doing as bad as sort of everybody else is actually, and especially for Italy, which is again usually really bad inflation and really bad employment situation. It's actually sort of bucking the typical trend for Italy, which is actually surprising. Uh, I want to attribute it to the Italian government, but I don't know enough to sort of speak for that, but all I see just it's very clear that situation in Italy is not as bad as, let's say, Germany, rest of the Europe, and rest of the world. Then if we look at Europe, so again, going back to this employment situation is very strong. You don't see pickup in unemployment in Europe, sort of similar to the US. Everything remains to be strong. That the only thing is that inflation remains very stubborn in Europe, even with increasing interest rates by European Central Bank. It still actually remains at the same level, 5.5. So they really have hard time fighting it, and it's again because of the energy. And probably I would assume that Germany one of the biggest contributor to this bad situation. And I would say Italy is sort of net sort of positive contributor to the situation. Um, Now let's actually a little bit get closer to Ukraine. Just want to provide quick update on that Niger situation that I mentioned before, where it's essentially Russia is effectively controlling three countries in sub-Saharan region, or Sahara region, I guess, probably better way to say. Uh, and it's Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And then the outcome of this is that basically the prices for uranium started to go up, started climbing, because Niger was 5% of uranium, of the world's supply of uranium, largest supplier to France, France is the largest consumer of uranium in Europe, because I think it's almost like up to 50% of its energy is produced from nuclear power. So it's a big deal. That's you know big win for Russia, I would say. And as you can imagine, Wagner Group was here instrumental. Wasn't Without Wagner Group, this would not be possible. Control of these three countries would not be possible. Now let's actually talk a little bit about China, but with respect to the war in Ukraine. So Chinese authorities banned the export of tactical UAVs. That really means DJIs. That are sort of bread and butter on the front line for actually both Russia and Ukraine, all on the individual level. This is the most widely used tactical UAV, and that's actually one of the strong contributor was to Ukrainians' ability to defend itself, to basically to strengthen a soldier on individual level on the front line. That makes it much more capable. And the same, Russia started to pick up, as I said, and catch up to Ukraine. At this point, it's probably sort of both are more or less plus minus equal on that level. So this ban is going to hurt. However, I do think this actually ban is aimed at Ukraine, because if Ukrainian volunteers, and it's not supplied through Ukrainian government. Ukrainian government does not buy these DJIs. It's all purchased through, Ukrainian citizens buy for the soldiers on the front line. They spend their own private money. And so this really means that they cannot buy from China anymore. And in case of Russia, even though technically those people in Russia who would buy them, private parties, they also cannot buy. But I believe the Russian government will still have access to all of that. So the net result will be probably basically banned for Ukraine, and things going to be okay for Russia, because the Russian Minister of Defense probably will be buying directly from the Chinese government. So things will sort of continue working for Russian side. It's probably going to be worse, because Russian Minister of Defense is obviously a bureaucratic organization, terrible. Everything they do is disaster. But still it's going to be better relative to have nothing for in Ukrainian case. And that's going to be a problem. And it also affects like there is a ban on infrared sites, which is also extremely important and valuable piece of equipment, on communication equipment, on radars. So basically, a lot of call it generally reconnaissance equipment, that is, your eyes. That's going to be, I would say, not available for Ukraine. And the importance of this is that China was offering much more competitive prices relative to, let's say, Europe or US. And if it's purchased by individual people in Ukraine, they can buy like fewer. And there are also a lot of export controls in Europe and in US. So again, this is going to be a big problem in the coming months. It's not immediately visible, but let's say, towards the end of the year, it's probably going to be a big problem for Ukraine in particular, and will reduce um, uh, the situation with basically the defense capabilities of Ukrainian units, because at the individual level, uh, your abilities are significantly reduced, and all of this reconnaissance equipment is the most critical piece of equipment next to actual weapons. And in some ways, I would say it's even more critical than weapons. So this is a very important and unfortunately very big blow for Ukraine that's sort of coming up. Um, this is now. I'm going to switch a little bit to Russia. So you can hear and see probably the sort of very good statistical results that's being posted by Russian government. As I said before, they are, in my opinion, very either fabricated and like definitely not relevant. But I'm gonna give you sort of more, in my opinion, more relevant numbers. Is for example, there's shortage of chicken meat developing in Russia, and obviously why it's important. It's food, it's meat, it's extremely important. It's a source of protein. It's the most important sort of thing. It's the the prices are highest on record at 350 rubles per kilogram. So that's, I don't know, a little bit less than $4. I think around $4. You can just roughly ballpark it per kilogram. And chicken meat is about 44% of the meat consumption in Russia. So it really hits quite hard. As you can see, it's pretty much almost half of meat consumption. What is even more important out of this is the chicken meat is obviously was cheapest, and that's why it's so popular, even though it's industrially sort of manufactured meat. It's pretty bad quality overall, but still it's a source of protein, and it allowed a low income um, citizens in Russia to be able to have protein essentially in their diet. So again, this creates situation with um, not immediate social unrest. I'm not trying to say, but this is another drop in the bucket of sort of social unrest and eventual 1917 moment that Russia is headed for. Ukraine is the same direction. I'm not trying to say that Ukraine is not heading there, but this is another important data point that helps to see where everything is going. There is another important data point is Russian currency. Russian ruble dropped relative to US dollar to 94 Russian rubles per US dollar. Again, this is you cannot fudge this number, this situation. This is clearly sign of deterioration in the Russian economy, because currency is always kind of like a condensed representation of the economy in any country. And so when it's going down, it's very clear that the economy is not doing well. And that's why I said that all of that statistics, it's easy to put the number on paper, or basically hit the key on the keyboard in the computer, but you cannot fudge FX rate or shortages of chicken. And so all of this data points clearly pointing towards worsening situation in the Russian economy, in the whole situation, economic, and then it always, as I said, overflows into political situation. Then and then also related to this, Russian central bank is also understanding that things are sort of going in the wrong direction, so they increased their inflation target for their year to 5%, which this is all I'm just trying to say is that central bank is much more sort of, I would say, savvy in the Russian bureaucratic system, and I would say much better managed overall in the Russian government sort of system again. And they are much more, let's say, relatively more honest relative to other, um, you know, um, parts of the Russian government. So that's why they are, so they again showing that inflation is moving in the wrong direction. And inflation again, it's a sign of deteriorating economy. It's not a sign of the economy is doing well and everything is great. It's clear sign of the deterioration economy wise. There is also a data point that up to 6.7 million Russians left Russia. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's a huge number. It's comparable to Ukraine. Most of them went to to places like Armenia, to Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, even Mongolia, which is amazing. But basically, they all going to this Central Asian countries, or such places like such as Armenia, probably Georgia as well as another direction. Probably also a lot of them going to UAE, Turkey. So basically, everybody who's sort of upper middle class in Russia is trying to, seeing the, I would say, writing on the wall and trying to escape. That's another very clear sign that things are not going well in the society as a whole, because it also means that this is also drain brain from Russia at the same time. Um, Now let's switch actually a little bit to Ukraine. Uh, First of all, what I mentioned before, Russia again attacked Ukrainian ports on the Danube River. Basically, those ports, they can be used to ship Ukrainian grain. So there was, another round of damage. So I would say probably at this point severely damaged the port infrastructure. And as I said before, Russian strategy is not to attack, because there were three ships that came despite this blockade that kind of like just went to Ukrainian ports, regardless of the Russian threats. Russian side did not attack them because that would create a lot of sort of international problems for Russia. So, so their strategy is to destroy the port infrastructure, which it's Ukrainian. Nobody will complain beyond just Ukraine in the on the world scene, and that's very, I would say, clever and efficient strategy to block Ukrainian grain export, and this also means destruction of Ukrainian farming and so on. And the reason why this is being done by Russia is to increase cost of support of Ukraine for the West, because that's, as I said, it's another 500 million per month um, of extra money that's not going to be available to Ukraine, and that's Ukraine will ask from the West. And so Russia is trying to actively make it unbearable for the West to continue supporting Ukraine economically. And then if I tie this back into what's going on in Europe economy-wise and in US, that becomes very convenient political talking point that Ukraine is creating all of these economic problems for us. Basically, it's a populism in the West that's basically trying to blame Ukraine for the problems that really internally generated, and Ukraine, has very little influence on any of that. So just if you look at we saw that let's say U.S. budget deficits, it's 2.4 trillion for in just 1 year. Let's say U.S. provided, let's say, 25 billion or 30 billion in 1 year, in that similar year to Ukraine. So you can see, let's say, U.S. stops supporting Ukraine, it's not going to solve 2.4 trillion problem at all. Will not even create any meaningful change there. So again, this is becoming sort of political populism, nothing else than that, and that's very unfortunate for Ukraine. But this is the situation, and Russia is fully aware of that and trying to push this agenda in the West, in the sort of political scene of the West. So now go back again to Ukraine, and in Ukraine there's a very interesting trend that emerging, that members of the parliament, they basically quitting their jobs, and they just saying, okay, well, I quit and thank you very much and goodbye. This is and this is from the Ukrainian president's party. So it's not from opposition. This is coming from current Ukrainian president's party, and he has majority. Like he can pass any laws. He doesn't need any opposition or anything. He has effectively, it's just one system. It's in a way dictatorship. Not sort of formally, but effectively how it works. Whatever Ukrainian president wants, he gets that passed through the parliament without any problem. And the reason I'm saying that this is very important trend, because most of these people, I call them rats. So and as we all aware, rats usually jump the ship when they feel that the ship might be sinking. And these people, in my opinion, again, I don't have, I'm not a judge to sort of to confirm that, but most of them live off the corruption, and so as you can imagine, when this sort of rats, they jump the ship, because they would never do that, because the corruption is sort of easiest money. That's quite a bit of a sign. In many ways, it's great that they sort of leave, but it's might be too late to sort of fix the situation. But again, this is very interesting and at the same time very worrisome trend. We'll see what happens, but as I said, that's a very concerning sign. Okay, now let's switch to the actually front line, to what's going on with actual military developments. I'm going to walk through in a clockwise fashion, as I always do, starting from the very north. So first, situation along the state border remains more or less the same. No essential changes. I would say this exchange of adversarial attacks, it switched from from the neighboring regions. Well, they're still there, but it sort of expanded more, where, as you can see on the news, Ukraine attacks Moscow or Crimea or other regions. So it's just sort of like expanded in the size, in the distance. But there's no but from the sort of practical military perspective, there's no incursions of Ukrainian forces or Russian forces that fight on Ukrainian side. Now let's move to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are somewhat stable after initial Russian successes. Here, where I showed where they captured a couple of villages, the advances were stalled by Ukrainian troops, and again, this was all purely tactical. From what I understand, Ukrainian forces had to bring here more brigades, so partially Russian command sort of succeeded because what they wanted is um, basically remove Ukrainian troops or reduce reserves that Ukrainian command has for attacks on Zaporizhya front line, and partially this was achieved because at least one brigade, maybe two, were brought here to sort of stem this tactical advances by the Russian troops. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. Uh, this is northern sector and it's quiet, nothing really happening here at all. And then in the southern sector, Russian side is trying to recapture lost ground, so they're launching counterattacks. They are not successful, and Ukrainian side sort of didn't sort of finish the job of liberating this Klishivka. So it's kind of like what's called the gray zone, where neither side really controls it. And then attacks here near Kurdyumivka kind of like on the pause from Ukrainian side for now. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here are as they've been the entire war. Essentially, Russian attacks here in Marinka, north of Avdiivka, and surprisingly was quiet here in Pisky. So basically, the situation remains the same without any real advances. So it's really total World War One here. It's the best example of World War One on the entire front line. Now let's move to the Zaporizhya front line. Things here also relatively quiet. The only actually action is Russian attempts to counterattack and recapture as well lost ground. This village Staromayorsky, which is next to Orozhaine, and the Russian side is still holding Orozhaine. I think I still would say that they're gonna lose it because Staromayorsky and Orozhaine, they kind of go together, and that's probably why Russian side is attempting to recapture Staromayorsky so they don't lose Orozhaine. But so far they were not successful, which means that they're gonna lose Orozhaine. It's just a question of time. Otherwise, there were no any major Ukrainian attacks since for all of these days. Things basically very, I would say, relatively quiet overall, and just some small tactical skirmishes and things on the pause. The situation along the Dnipro River also on the pause. There is no new sort of advances, no new developments here. Status quo remains. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time.